Αγαπητοί φίλοι, καλησπέρα σας. Και σήμερα από το New York College, από αυτό το φιλόξενο κανάλι, το οποίο νομίζω έχει καθιερώσει ένα εβδομαδιαίο ραντεβού με όλους εσάς. Έτσι λοιπόν και σήμερα, 8 Απριλίου 2021, είμαστε μαζί με τη σειρά σεμιναρίων Wellness Café. Το Wellness Café, όπως ξέρετε, αναφέρεται σε θέματα υγείας, ευεξίας και γενικά στην προώθηση μιας καλύτερης ζωής, ειδικά σε περιόδους όπως η σημερινή, όπου η ανθρωπότητα διέρχεται αυτή την πάρα πολύ δύσκολη κατάσταση με την πανδημία του κορονοϊού. Μέσω λοιπόν αυτής της σειράς σεμιναρίων ελπίζουμε πως συμβάλλουμε και εμείς ως εκπαιδευτικός οργανισμός σε μια προσπάθεια να κάνουμε όσο το δυνατόν καλύτερη τη ζωή μας. Η σημερινή μας προσκεκλημένη είναι η Δόκτωρ Έμε Βίντα Στάσιο, η οποία είναι διδάκτορ ψυχολογίας, συγγραφέας και ιδρυτής του PAME Code. Το PAME Code είναι ένα ακρονίμιο και προέρχεται από τις λέξεις purpose, σκοπός δηλαδή, action, δράση, momentum, η στιγμή, ή αν θέλετε στα αρχαία ελληνικά το λέμε ο καιρός, ή και βέβαια energy, δηλαδή ενέργεια. Και το PAME Code αναφέρεται στο πώς πρέπει να διάγουμε το ταξίδι της ζωής μας, πώς πρέπει να θέτουμε σκοπούς. Και νομίζω ότι η καλεσμένη μας έχει να μας πει αρκετά πάνω σε αυτό το κομμάτι. Η Δόκτωρ Βίντα Εστάσιο έχει υπάρξει επίσης λέκτορας και ερευνήτρια ψυχολογίας και έχει μία μακρά θητεία σε διάφορες ακαδημαϊκές θέσεις στο Πανεπιστήμιο του Κίλες στις Φιλιππίνες, στο University of East London, στο City University και σε άλλα πανεπιστήμια των Φιλιππίνων. Επιστημονικά της ενδιαφέροντα είναι η προώθηση της υγείας, ιδιαίτερα στις κοινότητες, και στην καριέρα της έχει συνεργαστεί με διάφορους οργανισμούς σε έργα τα οποία στοχεύουν στην προώθηση της ευημερίας ομάδων μεταναστών, εθνικών μειονοτήτων, παιδιών, νέων ατόμων, ηλικιωμένων, επίσης ατόμων με μαθησιακές δυσχέρειες, κάτι το οποίο στον τομέα της παιδαγωγικής κατά τα τελευταία χρόνια είναι αρκετά δημοφιλές. Βλέπουμε αρκετούς νέους επιστήμονες και από τον χώρο της παιδαγωγικής και της ψυχολογίας να ειδικεύονται στο κομμάτι των μαθησιακών δυσχεριών. Επίσης ασχολείται με ομάδες διαφορετικού σεξουαλικού προσανατολισμού, αλλά και με αυτόχθονες κοινότητες, πράγμα το οποίο θα μας μιλήσει μετά. Επίσης είναι μέλος της συντακτικής επιτροπής του Διεθνούς Επιστημονικού Περιοδικού Journal of Health Psychology και έχει μια ευρεία δραστηριότητα στην προώθηση των ανθρωπίνων δικαιωμάτων και της κοινωνικής δικαιοσύνης. Να πω εδώ ότι το σημερινό μας σεμινάριο θα διεξαχθεί στην αγγλική γλώσσα. Εσείς μπορείτε να στέλνετε τα ερωτήματά σας είτε στην αγγλική γλώσσα είτε στα ελληνικά και θα μεταφράζουμε εμείς στη συνέχεια, στο chat που βλέπετε στο YouTube είτε στο email sciencecafe@nyc.gr. Επίσης να σας πω ότι και μετά το πέρας του σεμιναρίου το βίντεο θα παραμείνει ενεργό στο YouTube, όπως και όλα τα άλλα βίντεο τα οποία έχουμε κάνει, και θα μπορείτε να το παρακολουθήσετε όποια στιγμή θέλετε. So, Eme, I would like to thank you for your contribution into Wellness Café, and I think that you have a very interesting presentation to share both with us and our viewers.
Yes,
so,
thank you for having me.
We're listening to you.
Yes, thank you very much for having me. Kostas, do I share my screen with you? Let me just see how this works. You need to enable screen sharing. Are you able to...
Δώστε μας ένα λεπτό. Στις ζωντανές εκπομπές καμιά φορά τα συστήματα αργούν. If there is any problem, I can do it for you.
Thank you. Yeah, it just says that the host disabled participant screen share. It might be in your settings.
Give me a second. Give me a second. I think now you're okay.
Let me have a go. Excellent, excellent. Okay, so I'm just sharing with you my screen now. Can you see it?
We can see your screen right now.
Excellent. And let me just see if I could make it a full screen mode. That's perfect. Well, I have to say, Cosas, I really do appreciate you having me here tonight. I know because of COVID, we're doing it virtually, but really, I'm now in Athens. It's just so amazing. I've been in the UK for
But we
18
need to
years.
enhance our well-being.
Yes, I
That's the
know,
goal.
right?
The
That's the
final cause,
mission.
according to Aristotle.
Moving
Enhancing our
from one
well-being.
place to another. I'm originally from the Philippines, by the way. I think you did mention that in your introduction. I'm sorry, I'm still learning Greek. We've been here since November, and I'm still learning a few Greek here and there, but I'm originally from the Philippines. I did my postgrad master's and PhD in the UK, and did my health promotion and community development work there for 18 years. And with COVID happening and Brexit happening, we've made the decision to come here to Athens. And really, I could go there in New York College. We're walking distance away from your building, but because of COVID, we're just doing this virtually. But I'm really so delighted to be here tonight and to talk to you about promoting health and wellness through community empowerment. This is something that I feel deeply and truly passionate about. I've dedicated most of my academic career in health promotion and community development, particularly using health psychology as a way to promote health and wellness. Yeah, my name is Emmy Estacio. Good evening, everyone. I'm the founder of the PAMI Code Limited, and my main research interest is in health and community psychology. And for tonight, we're going to talk about so many things about health and wellness, but we're essentially going to start with defining what health is and what are the determinants of health. And when we talk about the determinants of health, we're not just talking about the biological factors, the physical components that affect health. There are so many aspects, so many factors that impact on health and well-being, and we'll touch upon all these other factors. So when we develop health promotion and community development projects, we can consider all of these factors from the micro level to the macroeconomic level that impacts on our health and well-being. After that, we'll touch upon why community empowerment matters, because certainly community empowerment is a way to promote health and well-being on a more bigger scale, not just on an individual scale, but more on a communal and societal level. And finally, I'll share with you some of the research case studies that I've led myself in the community development arena, particularly some of the applications of psychology in health and community empowerment. So let's get started. So, in terms of defining health, the World Health Organization, since its inception in 1946, defined health as a state of complete physical, mental, and social well being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. From this definition, we can see that health is not just a biological experience. We can see that it encompasses multiple facets such as the physical, the mental, and social wellness, and not merely us being unwell or the absence of disease or infirmity. The thing here is it also states that it's this complete state of physical, mental, and social well-being. So there is an ideal that we are aiming for when we talk about health. And this definition of health is actually in line with the Dahlgren and Whitehead's onion model of the determinants of health. As you can see here at the center are the fixed factors such as our age, our sex, and our genetics that can impact on our susceptibility to illness and could impact on our health. But as we can see here, there are multiple layers in this onion model that could influence our health and well-being. So for example, and for many health promotion initiatives, there's a lot of focus around the individual lifestyle factors wherein people are being asked to eat healthily, to have physical activity, to stop smoking, to drink less, and so on. So many of our health promotion initiatives focus on these individual lifestyle factors because we know that there are certain health behaviors that could impact on our health and well-being. And certainly for many health psychologists who specialize in behavior modification, we have all sorts of health psychology models that help people, for example, to quit smoking or to lose weight or to improve their physical activity and so on. But as we can see here in the determinants of health, it's actually just one layer of the multiple layers of the determinants of health. And we have to consider that it's not just about individual lifestyle factors that impact on our health, but we also have these multiple layers such as our social and community networks, our peer support, our family, our friends, our living and working conditions. For example, if you have a stressful work environment, or even worse, if you are unemployed, how does that impact on your stress levels? How does that impact on your ability to implement the choices that you want to make in your life? In this layer, we also have the level of education. And certainly in my line of work as a health psychologist, I've specialized in health literacy, for example. We've seen a direct correlation between levels of health literacy and wellness, wherein people who have lower levels of health literacy were more likely to have chronic health conditions or have poorer behavior health outcomes because of this low levels of literacy. So we can see here that education is also a determinant of health. Agriculture and food production, water and sanitation is certainly something that we will touch upon later. Water and sanitation is a basic human need, and yet there are so many people in our world, globally, still don't have access to safe water and adequate sanitation. Access to healthcare services and also levels of housing could also impact on your health and well-being. And finally, this outermost layer, this is something that we really need to pay attention to. The general socio-economic, cultural, and environmental conditions could impact on our health in such a way that it could ripple its effect on all the different layers of the determinants of health, whether we are in crisis. Certainly for those who are living in Greece for the past 10 years, going through the Greek economic crisis, you know what it's like to be in this position and how that could impact on your sense of control, on your health and wellness, and how you actually relate with one another. And it's this general socio-economic, cultural, and environmental conditions could ripple into your living and working conditions, your social and community networks, your individual lifestyle factors. Maybe there may be people who are under severe hardship that they end up going that they end up adopting unhealthy behaviors. So we need to pay attention to all of these levels of the determinants of health and not just focus on the individual lifestyle factors. Now, when we talk about this, it begs the question whether we are responsible for our own health. Is if we understand that health is being determined by multiple interrelated variables that range from innate factors such as our age, sex, and genetics, to the social and community influences, the living and working conditions, and the general socio-economic and cultural environment, it begs the question whether we actually do have control over our health and how responsible we are for our own health and well-being. So there are two different approaches to this. The behaviorist approach argues that the promotion of health is really a matter of personal responsibility, because it is within the control of the person, that it is your choice to eat well or to exercise or to stop smoking and so on. So the behaviorist approach would assume that if you are unhealthy, that's your fault because you've been eating junk and because you've been smoking and you've been drinking and so on and so forth. So the behaviorist approach assumes that it is within the individual's control and it is the individual's responsibility to make lifestyle choices that are conducive to better health and well-being. On the other hand, the structuralist approach assumes that actually there are forces that are beyond the control of individuals, sometimes even the control of nation states, that could impact on our health and well-being. So we might desire, for example, to make choices that are good for our health, but our social and economic barriers stop us from implementing those choices. Sometimes even the government is unable to provide you with access to, for example, adequate health care or adequate social care to enable you to make those lifestyle choices that will make you healthy. So, what I would say about this, when we talk about responsibility for health and who is in control of our health, of course, as individuals, we need to take responsibility for our health. We need to contribute and look after our own health by looking after our body and so on. But at the same time, at the more social, at the more societal level, at the community level, we also need to consider that there is also a degree of responsibility for the government to look after its citizens and ensure that they are able to make the choices that they want to make to help them to lead healthier and happier lives. So there needs to be a balance between the behaviorist approach and the structuralist approach. Now, when it comes to power, I have to put up this slide because the traditional notion of power within the state system right now is being questioned, because we do have the emergence of new centers of power. The world trade and politics right now are set on a different playing field. We have more complex interactions, the actors are becoming more diverse, and the patterns of interaction getting more complicated. So when it comes to empowerment, particularly if we're looking at individual empowerment, community empowerment, and more of a social empowerment, we need to look at who's holding the power and who's really taking charge of our life and our ability to implement the choices that we want to make. So this is why empowerment matters. If we look at it from a global scale, when people don't have enough power, it is really difficult for them to live healthier and happier lives. Let's just have a look at some of the statistics on a global scale. For example, here in this slide, to elaborate on the global inequalities of health, if you are someone who's born in Japan, your life expectancy is 84 years. Whereas if you are born in the Central African Republic, your life expectancy is 53 years. Now, this difference of over 30 years, simply by the geographic location of where you are born, it actually shows how important it is, and how less control we actually have when it comes to our life expectancy, just because you were born in a particular place in this world. Also, in terms of gender, we can see here that every year, more than 300,000 women die from maternal complications. But again, depending on where you are in the world, over 85% of these deaths actually occur in the disadvantaged communities in Asia and in Africa. Interestingly enough, also in terms of malaria, we know that malaria causes more than 300 million acute illnesses and kills at least 1 million people every year. But we know that the children are the most vulnerable, and that there are more than 1,200 children who die from malaria every day. So it's usually those who are most vulnerable, who suffer the most when we look at global inequalities and health. Now, for those of you who are who love public health and statistics and so on, I would really encourage you to have a look at this video by Hans Rosling. I'm not going to show it here, but you can do that in your own time. But essentially, in this video, he maps out the data wherein you can see that as income goes up, life expectancy also goes up. There is a direct correlation between income and life expectancy. Obviously, there would be a plateau at some point because people will have to die regardless of how rich you are. But we can see here that the higher the income, you can see that the lifespan also increases. And it really shows that community empowerment and community development is really important if we were to minimize these global inequalities in health, especially now that we can see this plateau whereby when we reach a particular level of income, extra increases in income doesn't necessarily lead to higher life expectancy anymore. It plateaus at some point. And so it would be really important to identify where and how we could level off some of these inequalities so that those who are in a less developed position will have more opportunities for health and well-being. Earlier, we looked at the determinants of health. We briefly looked at water and sanitation. This is one of the statistics that I've pulled out. Although there are slight improvements that we've seen over the past 20 years because of the Millennium Development Goals, but still 790 million people still do not have access to safe water. This is 11% of the population, and more than 1.8 billion people around the world, which is a quarter of the world's population, still lack access to adequate sanitation. These are basic human needs. Sometimes we take these access to safe water and adequate sanitation for granted, but there are billions, millions and billions of people who still do not have access to safe water and adequate sanitation, which is absolutely essential if we want to promote health and wellness. Also, if we dig inequality a little bit further, even if we don't look at inequalities between countries, within countries, and looking within inequality, there are also other existing inequalities. For example, when we look at gender, globally, women still earn 24% less than men on the global scale. 75% of women in developing regions are also in the informal economy, which means that they have less protection in terms of job security and employee rights. Also, women do at least twice as much unpaid care work as men, which actually takes away a lot of their time and their energy when that could be spent on them actually earning money for themselves and for their families. In terms of race, we've seen this in Western countries. In terms of racial inequalities, people from Black and minority ethnic groups tend to have higher unemployment rates, tend to live in poorer conditions. And we've seen mental health issues associated with experiences of racial discrimination. And although we still need to look at the data a little bit more, we are already seeing some racial inequalities related to COVID-related deaths, wherein people from minority and ethnic backgrounds in Western countries tend to have a higher rate of COVID-related deaths. In terms of socioeconomic status, the rich-poor divide is also quite stark. We've seen that people from lower socioeconomic status tend to have worse self-reported health, they have lower life expectancy, and they are more susceptible to chronic conditions. Certainly for me and my work, when I was in London, you would expect that a country such as a UK, a very rich country, will have all of its citizens living healthy lives, and yet we've seen the rich poor divide in countries such as the UK, wherein those who are in a lower socioeconomic status were having worse self-reported health, and they were experiencing more chronic health conditions and worse health outcomes. In relation to that, possibly people from low socioeconomic status tend to have behaviors and experiences that could lead to poorer health outcomes. So, for example, those who are from a lower socioeconomic background tend to be born with a low birth weight. They may experience family instability, poor diet and nutrition, poor educational outcomes. They may be exposed to addictive behaviors, and particularly in terms of unstable or unemployment, low control over their stress levels, and inadequate access actually to capital and support, which lessens their ability to control and have better choices in their lives, which could impact on their experience of health and wellness. So there are so many complex things, so many complex factors that we have to consider when we talk about health and well-being. It's not just about your personal individual lifestyle, but as we've seen earlier, there are multiple determinants of health that we have to take into consideration when we look at health promotion projects. So I think I'm going to pause there for a while. Costas, do we have any questions or any comments from the
So
viewers so
far, we don't
far?
have any questions. We're just waiting for our viewers to ask whatever they want. And possibly after you finish, then we're going to proceed to the discussion.
Excellent. So I think I'm just going to continue. I hope everyone is with me when I say that health is a fundamental human right. And as we've seen from the determinants of health, there are some people, some pockets of society whereby this basic human right is being challenged by the levels of inequity between nations, and actually even within nations, wherein the poor not only tend to have worse health outcomes than the better off, but they also have less access. They have this inadequate access to resources and opportunities that can help them to realize their fullest human potential. There are pockets in our communities wherein they know what they need to do to live healthier and happier lives. But when they don't have the access to the resources and the opportunities that will get them there, then that's where we need to question whether this universality of the human right to health is actually being implemented on a global scale. Now, you may notice that I actually did mention here health inequity instead of just mentioning health inequality. There is a difference between inequity and inequality. When we talk about health inequality, we talk about this generic term which designate differences, variations, and disparities in the health achievements of individuals and groups. When we talk about health inequality, because we are different, because we have different genetic compositions, and we have individual differences, there are differences that we can expect. That's acceptable. However, when we talk about health inequity, these are the inequalities in health that are deemed to be unfair or stemming from some form of injustice, whether it's to do with gender, race, or your socioeconomic status, or simply because you are born on the wrong side of the tracks. That's when we have to question whether health inequity is something that we can just accept or something that we actually need to challenge. And so here's the point here. Health inequity is the issue. Health inequity is rooted within unjust power relations between individuals and groups. It arises when society, us as society, allows unfair circumstances to restrict people's freedoms and opportunities to exercise their rights and responsibilities. The winners and losers in this context are determined, sometimes manipulated by those in power because they want to stay in power. And it is unfortunate that health inequalities are often to the detriment of the most disadvantaged members of society. And when I do my health promotion work, we always look at health inequity as an issue. It may be that there are people who have been born in these circumstances and accept their circumstances as a given. We actually do need to challenge these and question whether these are acceptable or not, and whether there are ways that we can remedy to lessen the gap between those who are advantaged and those who are not so. So for us, our contributions as scholars, for us academics, we can contribute in terms of our research for policy to be led by evidence-based research. As Kaplan contends, good public policy should be based on good scholarship. Social and economic policies that affect the lives of individuals and communities need to be investigated with a critical eye, using sound theoretical base and a good methodological approach. And for me, my position as an academic, I consider myself a scholar activist. I use my research as a way to inform public policy, to inform projects, to inform community-based projects based on evidence and insights that we collect from our research. And for us as academic, as scholars, we can use our research expertise, the way we collect research evidence, the way we analyze and disseminate research can be a really good way to inform public policy, so that these policies could impact more positively on the lives of individuals and communities that get affected by these policies and projects that they implement. So this is where critical health psychology comes in. As I've mentioned earlier, my background is in community and health psychology, but critical health psychology is one of the four evolving approaches in health psychology, wherein we analyze how power, economics, and macro-social processes influence health, healthcare, and social issues. And it is also the study of the implications for the theory and practice of health work. So it's not just focusing on the individual lifestyle factors like smoking, diet, meditation, and so on. Of course, these are useful, and certainly there is a branch of psychology that focuses on that. But critical health psychology is one of the four evolving approaches that focuses mainly on power, economics, and macro-social processes. Now, as you can see here, clinical health psychology, community health psychology, public health psychology, and critical health psychology are these four approaches to health psychology, and each approach can focus on on each layer of the Dahlgren and Whitehead model that we talked about earlier in this seminar. So as you can see, the clinical health psychologists could help people, for example, to quit smoking, to help them to exercise more, or to eat more healthily, or even to improve their mental health, personal health and well-being, reduce stress levels, and so on. Clinical health psychologists can help individuals in that respect. But in terms of the community, public, and critical health psychology, we're dealing with the more with the other layers of the model, wherein we look at the social and community influences, living and working conditions, and the general socio-economic, cultural, and environmental conditions. Now, when it comes to critical psychology, we have a different way of doing our work. When it comes to mainstream psychology tries to be quite objective, and human existence is often constructed within an individualistic framework. Critical psychology, on the other hand, links individual and society. You cannot separate the two, and context is an important element in our psychological research. We cannot take context away, because when we observe the individual, you need to also consider the context that that individual is in. When it comes to epistemology, again, the approach to critical psychology is different from mainstream psychology. With mainstream psychology, it assumes that knowledge can be discovered through empirical investigation. We try to be objective in mainstream psychology. We use the scientific method and be detached from our quote unquote subjects. With critical psychology, we acknowledge that knowledge is a social construct, and the way we create and disseminate knowledge is political in nature and is never value free. And so, for us critical psychologists, we do recognize that we are scholar activists. We are passionate about social issues. We do have our own values, and we acknowledge that some of our values could influence how we do research, and how we create and disseminate knowledge. We do not deny this, and we embrace this wholeheartedly, and we just remain transparent about our issues and our personal and political biases. And in terms of our methodology, mainstream psychology adopts a logical positive approach, which means that it adopts a more scientific method. It's more inclined to use quantitative methods and quantitative analysis when it comes to collecting and analyzing data. Whereas with critical psychology, we adopt a more pluralistic approach. We use research methods as tools, so we can combine quantitative, qualitative, and action research methods, so that we can have a more holistic perspective of what we are investigating, and use a more pluralistic approach when we do our research. So it could be a combination of quantitative, qualitative, and participatory approaches, which I can talk about more later on as we explore research methods in critical psychology. So before I end this bit around critical psychology, I just have to say that, okay, David Marks is someone that I've worked with since 2002. We've been working with for nearly 20 years now, and we still work together. But certainly his work, his essay on critical health psychology really influenced my career in academia. And this is what he wrote. He said, critical health psychology is concerned with the political nature of all human existence, admits compassion in theory and practice, values freedom of thought, and is aware of social interdependence of human beings as actors. The context for study is the whole of society, government, and commerce. In particular, it is concerned with the impact of power structures as facilitators or barriers to achieving health. It focuses on the aspiration of health promotion programs that claim to be working towards all people taking equal share of life chances, opportunities, and resources for health. Through the use of theoretical analysis, critical thinking, social and political action, advocacy, and leadership skills, the critical psychologist draws attention to issues that warrant reparation and takes action thereon to amend the situation, or at least give it a higher profile. And I really took this to heart. I even before I went to the UK to do my master's and my PhD, I came in with this deep sense of passion for social justice. I've seen from where I came from in the Philippines that inequalities exist, and I felt the need to use my research and to take action where I can take action. And so when I adopted my research ethos, I wholeheartedly embrace that I am a human being who has the ability to think, And as a human being, I am not detached to emotions, unlike some scientists who would like to believe that science and research needs to be emotionless and detached from any values or any bias, because it will taint your evidence. For me, my research ethos, I am transparent, that I am a thinking person, that I am not detached from emotions. And when it is necessary, that I'm also inclined to use the research evidence that I gather from my work to take action to improve the lives of people that I work with in my research. So it's not just doing research from my ivory tower in academia, but using my position, my privileged position as a scholar activist, to use my research to improve the lives of the people around me, and to take action based on the research evidence that we get from our work. So what I have to say about this as well is there also needs a balance between the thinking, feeling, and acting. I do know from my work as a community development specialist, there are some people who just think and they don't do anything about that. Or there are some people who are passionate about social justice, social justice this and social justice that, but they don't do anything about it. And there are people who are pure action. They run around like headless chicken, but they're actually not thinking, or they have no basis for their actions. So what I would say is, if we could marry these three, the thinking, feeling, and action aspects of our work as health promotion and community development specialists, then we would be able to have this balance of evidence, of passion, and also action to improve the communities that we work with. And at the same time, with us being a thinking, feeling, and acting person, we have to consider that we also are within the context of the micro, meso, and macro factors. And whatever we do, whether you think that you're just doing a tiny bit of work, it is your contribution, and your contribution can still ripple and have an impact on the theory, research, and practice of your particular field, and even ripple out if you're so inclined to do that. So Costas, I think I'm going to pause there. Do we have any comments so far, or still no
So
comments
far, we
from?
have not any comments, so you can go on with your
We can carry
presentation.
on. We can carry on. Awesome. Okay. I'm going to continue and I will talk about my primary research interest, which is health promotion. I get really excited when I talk about health promotion. And the definition of health promotion that I've adopted is the Ottawa Charter in 1986, a definition of health promotion as the process of enabling people to increase control over and to improve their health. The thing that I want to emphasize here is the word process of enabling. When we talk about health promotion, we are not just telling people what to do. This is different from health education. Health education is more about informing and knowledge dissemination. When we talk about health promotion, we talk about this process of enabling people. We talk about advocating for people, mediating, and enabling them to increase control over and to improve their health. Earlier, we talked about levels of control. When people don't have control over the factors that impact on their lives, that's really a surefire way to lower their levels of health and well-being. Because, for example, health education might tell me I need to eat healthily. I need to eat all organic. But if I have no access to that food, or if I have no, if I have insufficient income to buy all organic, then I have no ability. I am disempowered to control over the factors that and the choices that I want to make to improve my health. So, this is really important when we talk about health promotion. It's about enabling people, empowering them, and enabling them to increase control over and to improve their health. We're not just telling them what to do, we are improving the circumstances and their ability to make the choices that will lead them to healthier and happier lives. Now, when it comes to the research approach that I've adopted, we talked about participatory research earlier. Mainstream psychology might adopt a logical positivist approach wherein you have quantitative methods, you measure, you analyze quantitatively and so on. But for me, my research approach is more of a participatory action research approach wherein this is the approach wherein we have this collaboration between the researcher and the community, and we have this common aim to, first of all, identify an area of concern to that community, generate knowledge about that issue, and plan and carry out actions meant to address the issue in some substantive way. What I love about participatory action research is often the research agenda is dictated by the community themselves. They identify what is important to them. They actually set their own aims, the objectives of the research, and even the research question is identified as a collaborative approach between the researcher and the community. And once you've identified that area of concern, we generate knowledge about that issue together using participatory methods. We can talk about participatory methods later, but some of my favorite methods are photo voice, world cafe, diary studies. I just go crazy when I talk about participatory methods, but we generate knowledge with the community to answer the questions that they've identified. And once we've generated research evidence, we use that evidence to plan and carry out actions meant to address the issue in some substantive way. So it's not just about identifying problems, and it's not just carrying out research for the sake of conducting research. We identify the problems, we collect evidence, and based on the evidence, we identify solutions and do something to make the situation better for the community members that we are working with. So this is my research approach. I absolutely love participatory action research. It's not necessarily a straightforward approach. And it's not really for the faint-hearted as well, because you have to work with so many people and you have to juggle so many power relations and politics when you adopt participatory action research. But if you are someone who's deeply passionate about social and community issues, and if you are passionate about improving the lives of the people that you are working with, then participatory action research is something that you will have to look into, because it involves the community at all stages of the process, from identifying the aims to even designing the research methods, what would work and what wouldn't work in that community, how you're going to collect the data, what are you going to do with the data, and what actions they can do to address the issues that you've identified from the research. So if you're someone who wants to look into this, read more about participatory action research. It's a fantastic research approach, especially if you're someone who's very passionate about social and political issues, and want to improve the lives of communities. So this is a model that my friend Mary Bryden Miller actually came up with to show what the participatory action research process looks like. So you can see that you have the community and the researcher collaborating together, and the components of participatory action research involves social action, popular education, and community-based research. I think community-based research is self-explanatory. Essentially, you're doing research in the community. And social action also is self-explanatory, meaning when you carry out the research, you actually do something about that. But popular education really is based on the principles of Paulo Freire. He was a Brazilian educator, and wrote the book Pedagogy of the Oppressed. And he popularized this concept of conscientization, wherein he noticed that in some disadvantaged communities, community members tend to become passive recipients of their circumstances. It's almost as if they became passive receivers of information, and they just accept their circumstances as a given. With popular education, it's more about raising awareness and making community members challenge and question whether their circumstances is a given, whether they can change it or not. Because when you raise critical consciousness, when you raise critical awareness, that's when you actually empower community members not just to become passive recipients of their circumstances. There may be some people who would say, there's nothing I can do, I was born poor, or there's nothing I can do, I have no resources, I was born in this circumstance, there's nothing I can do, I am disadvantaged, I am powerless. When it comes to popular education, particularly when you facilitate participatory action research, Paulo Freire would encourage us as facilitators to raise awareness and encourage community members to question and challenge whether their circumstances are acceptable, or whether there are things that they have to change and need to change to make their circumstances better. So that's what popular education is all about. It's encouraging community members not to become passive recipients of their circumstances, but to raise critical awareness, raise critical thinking, and encourage them to challenge and question whether there's this circumstance is acceptable, and whether there are things that they can do as a community to change their circumstances for the better. So that's why I absolutely love participatory action research, particularly this component around popular education. Of course, you're doing community-based research because you're doing it within the context of the community, and you will carry out social action as well based on what you find from your research. But popular education is an important component, because that's the process wherein your community members question and challenge and raise critical thinking, and realize that they are not passive recipients of their reality. They are active participants in their social reality, and they can create change if they become aware of what's going on around them. So, Costas, another break. Let's have a look. Are there any questions before I give an example?
We don't have any questions, but I have a lot after you finish.
Excellent. Okay. All right. Well, I've talked about health promotion. I've talked about the philosophy and the principles and my research approach and so on. I get so crazy when I talk about this. But let me just share with you a case study. This was part of my PhD a long time ago. It's gonna show a bit of my age, but this was my work, the case study of the Aita community in the Philippines. But just to give you a brief background, who the Aitas are. The Aitas are the indigenous people, one of the indigenous communities in the Philippines. They are the earliest inhabitants of the Philippines. There are about 110 tribes scattered around the country, which is about 0.18% of the entire Filipino population. So it is a minority group. For many years, they have been living in the mountainous areas in Zambales and Pampanga, but they have become increasingly marginalized because of the destructive volcanic eruption of Mount Pinatubo in 1991. So for many years, they have been isolated in their communities. They They essentially are nomadic communities, and they live in peace in their communities until the volcanic eruption of Mount Pinatubo in 1991, which forced them to actually interact more with people outside their communities. Unfortunately, because majority of them lack formal education, it makes them really susceptible, makes them vulnerable from economic exploitation because they are unable to read, write, and count. If people wanted to cheat them, they can cheat them. So we facilitated this action research project in this community. We were funded by Oxfam at that time. And as you can see, as a critical health psychologist, my role really was just to facilitate the process between all these key players in the project. We have the community members, we have non-governmental organizations, we have social civic organizations, and we also have government units that supported us in this project. And when we worked together to map out what we were going to do in this project, the vision was to develop an alternative learning system to promote health and wellness in the community. Essentially, the aim is community development, but the way to get there is through education. And education will have the components of culture, their livelihood, and also health promotion. And the way to launch this education program is through participatory action research. And as you can see here, we actually had this illustration. Initially, we had illustration A at first. And during the workshop, the Aita community actually added curly hair in illustration B to highlight that they are the ones holding the bow. For the Aita communities, they actually do take pride in their curly hair. Majority of the what do you call this, the mainland, like lowlanders like me, I have straight hair, I come from the city. But the Aita community, they take pride in their curly hair, and they corrected the illustration and put their curly hair in our diagrams to emphasize that they are the ones holding the bow and they are taking charge of this particular project, which is absolutely fantastic. Now, when it comes to participatory action research, there are several stages that we had to follow when we facilitate action research. First, we had to establish rapport, and we plan the project together with the community. Then we generate knowledge. In research terms, we call this data collection. Stage 3 is data validation, and then stage 4, 5, 6, and 7, that's the action components, wherein we actually take the research findings and turn them into action. So it's not just for the sake of doing research. We actually do something about the insights that we get from the research and use that to benefit the community members that we are working with. So in stage 1, we've done so many things to establish rapport and plan the research. Initially, we prepared a research proposal because at that time I was doing my PhD. As you know, in academia, we have to write a research proposal. We have to apply for ethics, a lot of paperwork, da-da-da-da-da. I prepared that. So I went to the community, told them about this, and after the first stage community visit and the community workshop, essentially all of the research plans that we had in London, it was torn into shreds. It's not gonna work. It's not suitable for us, and we had to start from scratch. So this is the thing with participatory action research. For those of you who are watching this and are thinking, "Woo, this is exciting. Let's use participatory action research." This is so common that as an academic, you may have
Typical day for a PhD student.
yeah, you have
Just a piece of
protocols.
cake.
You it changes all the time. Well, the thing is, we do our literature review. We think we know. We'll come up with a proposal and we'll have it approved and so on and so forth. And then you go to the community and the community will say, it's not gonna work. It's completely inappropriate. I do remember, I think one of the proposals that I told the communities, look, I want to organize a workshop where I'm going to ask you to draw your life, like drawing what was your life like before the eruption, before the volcano erupted, and what do you want your life to look like now, so we can inform what we can do in terms of health promotion and community development. And they said, Emmy, this is not going to work. And the reason why is because they actually don't know how to hold a pen. Because they have low literacy skills. Of course, they can't read, write, or count, but they also have difficulties holding a pen. So drawing actually wouldn't work for them. What they suggested instead is they just really want to gather as a community and do storytelling, and just move from one hut to another and tell stories about their life. That's something that works for them. So in this case, as a researcher, it really puts me back in my place, makes me remember that for me as a researcher, my role is just to facilitate. I'm not the one imposing the project on them. It is the community's decision and control on how this project is going to go, and even the methods that will work and not work, they know, and that will inform how we carry on and progress with the work. So that's what happened in stage one. So in stage two, this is what they suggested, and this is what we eventually did. We organized community workshops. We had this workshop where we talked about the structures of trade, because one of the biggest influencers of their health, if you like, is their level of income. They say that we can't actually do anything about our health because we have no money. Even if we want to buy something, even if we want to buy healthy food, we can't because we have no
One
money.
question, do they exchange their goods?
That's
They
correct.
don't use
That's
money.
Oh, well, no, 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 no. Here's the thing. When they started interacting with us, after the volcanic eruption, they had to sell their products. They had to sell their services as well. They participated in manual labor. They participated in construction and so on, because they had to interact with us. They were driven out of their homes because the volcano erupted. So they were forced to trade with us and use money, which made them vulnerable to exploitation, because they don't know how to count. They don't know really how money works. So that's what we actually talked about in the first community workshop. We talked about structures of trade and how they trade their products. Their primary product is charcoal and also bamboo. They were selling bamboo to the lowlanders. Let's call them the Aitas. They are highlanders. They are living in the mountain, and the lowlanders, the ones who were living in the lowlands, were trading with them. So we talked about that, and they felt as if they were powerless, because they keep saying, because we are illiterate, we don't know really what's going on. We cannot really negotiate very well because we are illiterate. So they really have this desire to learn how to read, write, and count, so they will have more power in these trade negotiation processes. So that's what we talked about in the first community workshop. We also talked about the social structure and the power and wealth ranking. What I loved about this particular workshop is we were gathered as a community. We were under the trees, we were sitting in the sand in the middle of the village, and all I had was a stick, like a branch from a tree. And what I asked them to do was, okay, let's identify all of the people in your society and everyone that you interact with. So they've identified government officials. There were volunteers, educators who were coming up to the mountain from time to time. There were spiritual healers, traders, and even foreign investors, because at that time there were foreign investors who were looking into the pieces of land in that area and turning them into golf courses. So, they were interacting with all sorts of people at the time. And I asked them, okay, let's identify them and let's rank them. Who do you think has the most power and who do you think has the least power? So they organized them according to their level of power, and they have identified the foreign investors as the people who are holding the most power, and the ones who are holding the least power were the community members, the aitas. And I gave them a stick and I said, okay, we've ranked you in this way. Let's draw a circle around these people, how much power they have, on the floor, because we were in the middle of the mountain. It was very sandy. We can draw on the ground. And when they were illustrating how big the influence and power of the foreign investors were, it was massive. It was like it was occupying the whole space. And for them, the aitas, they were just drawing like little circles. They only have so little control and so little power. And because the entire community was there, they were raising dialogue, and they were also raising awareness. There was a lot of discussion as well why this is the case. They were beginning to question, why are we powerless when we actually own this area? And that's the bit that sparks the magic, if you like, when you start to raise critical thinking, when you start raising awareness, and when you make it visible what the injustices are, and when people start to question, I don't think this is right, I think we need to do something about it. And when you do it in a public space, when you do it as a community, you get together, and that's where the magic happens. It sparks passion in the community, and it sparks action as well, because it's right there in the open, people talking about it. We cannot deny it, we cannot ignore it, we have to do something about it. So the community workshops worked really well. We also had this institutional diagramming workshop where we had the socio-political structure. We looked at all the services, healthcare, education, social care, and so on, and how much access they have to existing structures. And we've seen that even if these structures exist, their ability to access these services are so difficult. They live up high in the mountains. They need to walk 3 miles by foot to access the nearest school, and they don't even have shoes to get to school. So even if the services are available, even if you say that these services are free, of course it's your right to have education. It is your right to access healthcare. It is your right to vote. If you are unable to access these services and implement your rights, then really, what's the point?
I
So
have a short question
sure.
about, as I can see in your photos, you have many small children. Which was
Yes.
the reaction? Because I speak from the field of philosophy about curiosity. We know from Aristotle that every human being wants to know. This triggers science, curiosity. Which was the reaction of small children into these kind of interventions?
Oh my goodness, it was absolutely amazing. The children were there, they were listening. And I have to say, Cosas, when the very first workshop that I ran, we had it in the community center in the lowlands, so it wasn't even in their tribe. We were in the lowlands, in the community government building. It was filled with men, and the women were actually going out. The women carrying the children were going out of the meeting because they came out like, what's going on, come in, let's have a chat. And they said, it's not our place. It's not, we the men can take care of it, and the women will just hold the kids, and they will sit outside and not participate. And I said, look, I'm a woman, I'm facilitating this project, come inside. It took a while because I didn't really want to force them. They were uncomfortable. They were really uncomfortable. I didn't force them at the first time. They were uncomfortable. But eventually, as they got to know me, and they can see that as you can see, I'm really chatty, I'm really friendly. I really enjoy being there and having informal chats with them. And eventually, even without asking them, they would join. And because they had their children, the women were taking care of the children were also coming along. And I have to say, I was telling you about the workshop where we had the sticks, we were drawing on the sticks. The kids were drawing as well. Okay, they were drawing animals, they were drawing other things. But it was nice to see the whole community being there, particularly the women, also taking part. And by stage 4 and 5, I think this is probably my proudest moment when the women started arguing, in the
Did
it's
they
not
argue
it's
with
not
their
yes,
husbands?
it's probably not good news for the men. But by the time we got to stage 4, stage 5, where we were essentially sharing the research, sharing the evidence, the women were questioning the evidence. Because when we were interviewing the men, we asked them, okay, so you don't have a lot of money, where do you spend the money? And they would say, we spend it on food, we spend it on salt and things like that, to for our food. And when we presented it to the community in stage 4, the women were protesting, lies, they're not spending it on food, they're spending it on alcohol, and they are gambling and they are smoking. So I have to say that, okay, that's not good news, but at least it's empowering them to actually speak up and also identify that, yes, these are some issues that need to come out of the open. These are unhealthy behaviors, obviously, but also because they felt as if they were powerless and they didn't have a voice, encouraging them to speak up and say that this is not how it should be. It could trigger action and it could trigger change. So, to start off in stage 1, wherein women were actually coming out of the workshops because they felt that it wasn't their place, to stage 2, they started, interacting, to actually stage 4, they're starting to argue and question. I find it quite fascinating to witness, and for them to say that because I am a woman. And at that time, I know that I do have a baby face, and at that time, this was 2006, so this was like 15 years ago. At that time, I looked like I was 7 years old. They were saying, you as a woman, facilitating this project in the middle of men, it encourages them to speak up and do something, and they could actually
This was my
engage.
next question about if you faced cases of discrimination of women or possibly sexism, and how could possibly a society where men are in charge to accept a woman telling them what to do.
Mm. I have to say, in the Philippines, when I was facilitating this kind of project, it wasn't as difficult. I don't know why. In the Philippines, we are actually quite good in terms of gender equality. Probably not in indigenous communities. Indigenous communities have a more patriarchal structure, but in the Philippines in general, I didn't really experience that much issues with sexism. Racism, I did experience, working in Western societies, with me being coming from a minority ethnic group. I did experience that several times, in the UK, for example. But it's something that I just put in the research agenda and just speaking about it, and trying to have dialogue and communication about it, not necessarily having to have a fight, but to have a dialogue, and see where is the common ground. And instead of fighting racism, let's say, how can we promote diversity? How can we promote equality, rather than fighting something that is ism, fighting sexism, fighting racism? We can say, how can we promote equality? How can we promote diversity? That's a more meaningful way, and more productive way of dealing with this. And certainly working in community development, in health promotion. And for those of you who are watching this, maybe thinking about doing a PhD, you have to be prepared to experience power relations, power dynamics. And if you are one of those, if you belong to a group that has been disenfranchised for a while, be prepared to jump through hoops and barriers. But when you jump through those hoops and barriers, you're actually paving the way for others who are following you, and making it a lot easier for them in the future. So for this particular project, we have this stage two knowledge generation process. In research terms, essentially, we call this data collection. We had community workshops, but I also did hut to hut visits. Like, essentially, we call this door to door, but they didn't have doors. They didn't have doors in their home, so I just call it hut to hut visits. We did interviews. Essentially, it's storytelling. They were telling us about their experiences of health, the common illnesses that they experienced. What I've noticed is there was a lot of urinary tract infections among women there. There was a lot of respiratory infections going on there. And a lot of malnutrition as well, because they actually don't have that balanced diet, based on the interviews that we did. But also, one of the main issues that they experienced was this educational attainment, not because they didn't want to go to school. First of all, the school was inaccessible. It was really hard to get to. You might say 3 miles is not too far, but if you have no shoes to get to the school, it's not really a good thing to do. And in terms of their main sources of income, we talked about that as well. And it essentially usually comes from trade of bamboo, charcoal, and also manual labor. And these are, particularly with manual labor, this is unstable employment. So there's actually no job security, there's no income security, which, as you know, this is actually very, very stressful if you don't know when your next paycheck. They don't even have a paycheck. They just get paid when the next income would come. And for them, their primary expenditures, we found that they were buying a lot of salt and a lot of soy sauce. That's actually one of their primary expenditure, and rice. So they will buy rice, they will buy salt, to add salt in the rice. And they will have leaves, like they will have vegetables growing in their land. And that's essentially what they're going to eat. Root crops like gabi. I actually don't know what gabi is in Greek, but it's a root crop. That's something that they eat. And yeah, it's not necessarily a balanced diet, but that's all they could afford. So we also did interviews with the National Commission on Indigenous Peoples Commissioners to talk about the law, and so on. There were some land and ancestral domain issues going on in the community, and we had a lot of observation and informal storytelling. I think that's actually what made it so powerful, because when I go in there and look like a researcher, like I'm collecting data, they sort of clam up. But when it is more informal and it just becomes like a storytelling session, they open up and they feel more free to share what they wanted to share with me. So it becomes more genuine. It's a really great way to gather insights in the community, and as a result, it gets richer. You have a richer evidence as a result of that. So this is this is one of the things that they came up with in the first workshop. They wanted us to draw this illustration. They feel as if they are small and powerless, and that the traders are coming in, sucking all the resources from their community. As I've mentioned earlier, their main expenditure is salt, and they buy rice. And that's really it. So malnutrition is really quite common in this community. This is an example of a house in the lowlands. So yeah, this is not the Aita community. This is the path that we had to go to from the lowlands going up. So you can see that this is the basic structure. But for the Aitas, they essentially just have sticks and leaves as their form of housing. And as you can see here, yeah, they just have sticks, some bamboo here, and some leaves. And once it dries up, they just need to replace it, or they move on to the next site, and so on. So there's really it's really open. They don't really have a stable home. You can imagine during the typhoon season, it's really going to be very cold, and really difficult for the Aitas when you have a home like this. They also talked about their lifestyle. They go hunting. They actually shoot some birds for food as well. And they have this is their source of water. This is where they do everything. As you can see here, the kids, this is where they go for a bath. It looks like a nice photo here, but if you see the full picture, the kids have a bath there, but also this is where they do their laundry. As you can see here, all the laundry is there with the kids. This is where they wash their dishes. This is where they wash their feet after they come from construction. And this is also where they wash their animals. So as you can see here in this photo, the kid is here having a bath. And as you can see there at the top of the screen, the carabao, the animal, is just there at the top, all in the same stream of water. So when we talked about safe water and adequate sanitation earlier, this is what I'm talking about. So you can imagine that so many of the children here have worms and parasites. And it's one of the common illnesses. For the women, they have urinary tract infections as well because of this lack of access to safe water and adequate sanitation. So let me forward here. So after collecting all those insights from the community, we organized another meeting where we put together local residents, visitors, traders, teachers, volunteers, and local leaders to talk about what we found from our research, and also explore what we can do about it. We came up with an action matrix, and in the end, some of the action actually did happen. Just before I left the community to go back to London to finish writing off my PhD, they started building the literacy center, which is actually part of the agenda, in the action matrix, to actually build the literacy center, so they don't have to walk all the way down to the lowlands. They actually do have a literacy center in their community. Also, just before we started the project, access to the community was really difficult, but towards the end, they've actually improved access as well. And in terms of their communal spaces, this is one of the workshops that I was telling you. We were drawing circles on a stick on the ground. It wasn't necessarily conducive to meetings, to community meetings, but by the end of the project, the ITAS took the initiative to make their communal spaces more conducive to people just hanging out and just having a chat, coming together as a community and talking about issues that matter to them. So they actually took the initiative as well to do something about their lives. They've also set up their own cooperative. They bought some carabao, some animals as well, to improve their access to trade. They talk between each other. It's almost like the ITAS before we came to do our research, one of the issues that we found was the ITAs were competing with each other in terms of their prices for their trade, because they wanted to get the deal from the traders. So they lower their prices, and as a result, they were competing with each other. But as a result of the workshops, they found that if they came together and set their prices together as a community, they can demand better prices for their products as a community. So it empowers them to gain more control over their income, more control over their trade, and they can negotiate as a community rather than as individual families scattered and trading with the local traders. So in the end, by the end of our first action cycle, the question is whether we've achieved the empowerment agenda of our research. We can conclude that yes, we help to increase levels of social awareness and advocacy. Individual and community skills were enhanced. Political participation was also enhanced. In fact, it was the first time that some of them actually managed to exercise their right to vote. That even, yes, they have the right to vote, but now that they are able to read basic basic words, and they are now able to write their name and tick a box, they are now able to exercise their right to vote, which is really empowering. They've also improved their control over trade by coming together as a community. And most importantly, I think, is that we had this space for critical thinking. We encouraged them to challenge circumstances, not to accept circumstances as a given. It is something that they can co-create, and if they want to make things better, then they can do something about it. However, what I have to say as well is that these are not enough, because the success of these projects actually do depend on the cooperation of those who are currently in power. So even, for example, even if the ITAs come together and set up their own trading rules and prices, if those in the lowlands do not cooperate, then it's not going to work. So it is a two-way process. The community can only do so much, but there needs to be a two-way process if we really want community empowerment to happen. So that was something that I did in the Philippines, and that happened about 15 years ago, and I still do hold this, with David Marks, being my number one collaborator. This is something that he would want the future generations of PhD students, for example, and researchers who are interested in action research and community development. He says, for the brave new worlds of 2050 and 2100, will these priorities have changed beyond recognition, at least in the midst of the community of critical workers and scholars? Will global warming, population increases, poverty, longevity, and ideologies of oppression, survival, and suffering be major issues on the agenda? Will concepts in vogue today be given wider psychosocial interpretation and meaning? Will theories and research concerned with sustainability, empowerment, altruism, sharing, cooperation, communitarianism, and cultural and religious understanding have come to the fore? Will new concepts, theories, and methods have been created to deal with the many significant social and psychological problems of the day? The answer to all of these questions must be yes, but it depends on you. So the case that I've presented earlier is just one case, but there is still so much more that we can do. And for the past 15 years, I was involved in the project in the Philippines, but I've been in the UK for over 18 years. And while I was there in the UK, I still carried on leading and being involved in community action and research projects for health and wellness, particularly using participatory action research as a way to facilitate this process. So, for example, just shortly after I finished my PhD, I was involved in the Well London program, and I project managed the Healthy Redbridge project, whereby we worked with some of the most disadvantaged communities in London. And we organized community engagement workshops through World Cafe and appreciative inquiry. What that means is the World Cafe is a method wherein we set up a community center and we set it up like a cafe, and we ask community members to come into the cafe and talk about issues that matter to them. We talk about what are the problems that exist in their community and what are the solutions that they want to see, that they want to happen in the community. So by bringing community members together through the World Cafe, you're bringing in the voices from different segments of your community. And I'm really truly proud of being involved in the Well London program. You'll have to Google it and see what's going on with the Well London program, because the projects that came out of that program were informed by the voices of the community members. So it's not just researchers coming in and funders and local government units imposing projects, but it's actually community members telling what works in this community, what their experiences are like, giving them the voices and helping them to take ownership of the projects that happen in their community. So the Well London campaign, have a look at that. The Healthy Redbridge project. When I was in Stoke-on-Trent working as a lecturer in health psychology, I was also leading a project on managing diabetes. I worked with South Asian men and young men under 25, and we used a method called photo voice. I don't know if any of you know about this method, but I absolutely love photo voice. It is where we give cameras. Well, back in the day when I was doing this research, we didn't really have a lot of smartphones at that time. So we were giving away disposable cameras to our participants, and they were taking photos of their experiences of how they manage and live with diabetes. And based on the insights that we get from their experiences, we were able to come up with initiatives that will enable South Asian men and young men under 25 to manage their conditions better. And the interesting thing about this particular project is that the South Asian men, they were saying, you really shouldn't be focusing on us, because it's not really up to us what we eat. The women cook. So you have to talk to the women, and you have to show them how to cook healthily, because
Not the
in the
husband.
no, not the
Not
husbands,
the
because
husband.
and what I found, what we also found in that particular study, particularly with the South Asian men with diabetes in Stoke-on-Trent, was their primary occupation. Most of them were cab drivers, taxi drivers. So they were sitting all day, not a lot of physical activity. And when they get home, the food is already there, and the women in the household, they were cooking food with ghee. It was this very fatty substance. It's part of their cuisine, but they were able to identify that that's probably one of the reasons why they were gaining so much weight, is because of that ingredient. So I didn't know about that. If I was just going to conduct interviews, it's not going to be as rich than having photo voice. They were collecting photographs of their experiences. In fact, the South Asian men were taking photographs of their children, and they were saying, we are worried that if something happens to us, who's going to look after our children, and we are worried that our children will also live with diabetes when they grow up. So they really have this desire to improve their health and well-being, but they wanted to find ways together to do that. And one of the things that they expressed is that it's more important to actually educate the women, because it is the women who has the control over what the family eats. And if the women puts in healthy food on the plate, then that's what they're going to eat. So that's what they came up with in that particular project. I was also leading a project on the lived experiences of migrant nurses in the UK. And for this particular project, the method that I used was a diary-based study. I didn't really have any topic guide or anything like that. I just asked them, just write about your experiences. I don't really care what you want to write about, just write about your experiences. And for me, initially, as a researcher, I thought they were just going to write about culture shock, or they were just going to write about homesickness, and not really understanding the British accent, because it's a different accent. But what surprised me is that the nurses in my study actually wrote more about their experiences of racial microaggression. That wasn't part of my agenda. I didn't anticipate that. But because this was something that they were experiencing on a daily basis, and something that was actually impacting so much on their ability to care for their patients, or to have more job satisfaction at their work, that's what they wrote about. So with participatory action research projects, the agenda is being set by the community members, and that's actually what surprised me when I did that project with the migrant nurses in the UK. I didn't expect them. Maybe I was in denial, maybe I was naive when I first came to that country. I said, "Ah, surely racism doesn't exist anymore." And when we carried out that project, it turns out that it still does. And the migrant nurses in that project, even if it wasn't in my agenda, it wasn't something that I asked about, that's what they wrote about. And they wrote about everyday micro experiences of racial microaggression. And that's what came out of that study. So that's, that's what you will get when you use participatory methods. Sometimes you will generate insights that you would never anticipate, if you set your agenda yourself instead of letting your participants set it, for the project. Also, I also led this project on promoting diversity and internationalization in higher education. I absolutely love that project. We do have a lot of international students, in the UK. We used to have a lot of Greeks, in the UK. I don't know what's going to happen now that we've got Brexit, but certainly, we did have projects on how we can promote diversity and internationalization in higher education. So you can see that participatory approaches can be used in so many different contexts. I've done some work as well with, people with learning disabilities. We had workshops and champions, asking them how we can improve their experiences of bowel cancer screening. And we've also had some, workshops, photo voice workshops, to promote mental health and well-being of young people. So you can see that, there's this diversity of projects that you can that you can apply participatory research. And yeah, one of my favorites is photo voice, because after we've collected the photos as part of our, data collection process, we can organize exhibitions to raise more awareness, and to let people know, policymakers, stakeholders, and the rest of the community, what our community members and participants were sharing with us. So it's out and open to everyone, and it raises awareness, raises critical thinking, and it could spark action as well, because people are having dialogue, and they're talking more about it. So that's actually what I've done. And now that I am here in Greece, I really would be interested, to see what we can do in this context in Greece. And certainly, if there are those of you who are watching this, maybe you're thinking about, oh, I like this idea of participatory action research. I like the idea of using it for health promotion, for community development. And if you are interested, if you have this desire, perhaps do a PhD with New York College. Here are some ideas. I would really encourage you to explore, some of these topics. And certainly, if you want me to help you out, write your proposal, and maybe you could apply to New York College and do your PhD. That would be fantastic. So, for example, you do have the refugee crisis happening in Europe, particularly here in Greece. It would be really good if we can explore the lived experiences of refugees and asylum seekers in Greece, particularly women and unaccompanied children, so that their voices can be heard as well. If there are projects that are aiming to help them, it would be useful to actually get their voices heard and use their insights to inform to inform projects that aim to help them. So that's something that I'm particularly interested in. Now in the times of COVID, and because of my connections with healthcare workers, I'd be interested to see projects around protecting the health and well-being of healthcare workers, particularly learning from the experiences of frontliners of the COVID-19 pandemic. How was their experience, and did they have enough protection and support, not just in terms of them doing their tasks and their responsibilities as healthcare workers, but are they also being supported in terms of their psychological and mental well-being after being exposed to something like this? So a participatory action research project on this would be really interested. I would also be interested to explore how we can improve gender equality in Greece, particularly looking at the perspectives from Generation Z, just to have the perspective from young people. Surprisingly, when I was looking at European data on gender equality, it turns out, unfortunately, that Greece is at the bottom. I didn't anticipate that Greece actually has the worst gender equality index throughout Europe. So I think there is room for improvement there, and certainly participatory action research is a good way to look at insights, how we can improve the situation and how we can improve gender equality in this country. Also, participatory action research would be interesting to look into the lost generation, particularly the experiences of young professionals because of the 10-year Greek economic crisis, looking at their experiences and how we can support them better after going through this process. We could also look at developing initiatives that promote the health and well-being of people with learning disabilities. And certainly, being here in Greece, I've noticed that there is a thriving LGBT community here. I think from what I've experienced so far, and from what I've observed so far, people from LGBT people here in Greece are more open. They have more freedom, and I think there's so much that other countries could learn from the experiences of LGBT people here in Greece. And I think participatory action research would be a good way to capture their experiences and their stories, and we can certainly learn from them and apply them in other contexts. So these are some examples. I think that if you're watching this and if you are getting excited, maybe you want to do a PhD, maybe you want to write a proposal, here are just some examples. And certainly, if you need some advice and need some support in terms of how you can frame an action research project, what sort of methods you can use to generate data, how to analyze it, and so on, feel free to get in touch. And yeah, have a look at the New York College website on how you can apply. And certainly, Costas, you can guide them through the process as well. Like there's information available on your
website. Να πούμε για τους φίλους τηλεθεατές ότι πράγματι, ζητώ συγγνώμη, το New York College, σε συνεργασία με το Πανεπιστήμιο του Bolton, ένα από τα κορυφαία ιδρύματα της Μεγάλης Βρετανίας αυτή τη στιγμή, έχει θεσπίσει ένα διδακτορικό πρόγραμμα, διδακτορικό και MPhil, το οποίο τρέχει με μεγάλη επιτυχία εδώ και αρκετά χρόνια. Έχουμε πάρα πολλούς αποφύτους, οι οποίοι είναι πλέον διδάκτορες του Πανεπιστημίου του Bolton, οι οποίοι διαπρέπουν όχι μόνο στον αμιγώς ερευνητικό τομέα, αλλά και στον επαγγελματικό. Και συγκεκριμένα αυτά τα οποία σας ανέφερε η συνάδελφος, η δόκτωρε Στάσιο, είναι στον τομέα της ψυχολογίας, τον οποίο ήδη έχουμε στο New York College, υπό την καθοδήγηση της δόκτωρος Αντωνίας Βένσον. Και πραγματικά όποιος επιθυμεί να προχωρήσει στην σύνταξη ερευνητικής πρότασης και ύστερα από την αποδοχή της εκπόνησης διδακτορικής διατριβής, μπορεί να καλέσει το 210-32-25-961, όπου ο αρμόδιος συνάδελφος θα τον καθοδηγήσει σε ολόκληρη τη διαδικασία. Αλλά σας το λέμε και από την εμπειρία μας αυτό, το ταξίδι του διδακτορικού είναι ένα πάρα πολύ όμορφο ταξίδι μέσα στην επιστήμη και εμείς από πλευράς μας κάνουμε ό,τι μπορούμε για να βοηθήσουμε τους ανθρώπους οι οποίοι θέλουν να ταξιδέψουν μαζί μας μέσα σε αυτόν τον μαγευτικό χώρο. This is your son.
Vasilios Horozoglu.
Γεια σου, Βασίλη.
He wanted to spy. So are there any questions at all?
We have some questions from the email from our viewers.
Okay.
After the program with the AITA people, did you have any follow-up? What happened after several years?
Oh no, I have to say I didn't want to talk about that because there was a tragedy that happened in the community. If people want to read the whole story, it's in my paper called Playing with Fire and Getting Burned. And the hint is in the title. So what happened was after I left the community, all of the pieces were in place. They were setting up the community center. They were setting up their cooperative. All the pieces were in place. I was also raising money in London to help them, to inject a bit of capital in their cooperative so they can buy supplies that they need for the trade. And one day I received a phone call from one of my collaborators, and they informed me that there were some land grabbers, arsonists, in fact, who burned down the community. So tragedy did strike the community after I left. I did return. Actually, my supervisor didn't allow me to return because of the danger, but I had to go back to see what happened to the community. There were no deaths, and they simply moved from one location to another. The literacy center was spared. The literacy center was still there, but the huts were burned down. Because of the land disputes that happened. So that was the tragedy that happened. I didn't want to talk about it because it was a downer, but that's why I said in my last slide that freedom, let me go back to that slide actually. I've put here that freedom from oppression is a two-way process because there is only so much that the community can do. And if there are people who are in power who does not respect this, then all of these efforts will actually just go down the drain and people will start from zero. But that community was particularly resilient. Despite the tragedy that happened in the community, they did carry on, and they carried on learning how to read, write, and count. And the educators, the volunteers, they carried on and they came and they continued with the project. I have to say with a little bit more stress and a little bit more caution, but after the tragedy happened, they did get some support from the government to protect them, so that actually didn't happen again. But yeah, if you wanted to read the whole story and the follow-up, it's actually in a paper called Playing with Fire and Getting Burned. So it was, there was a lot of energy, a lot of enthusiasm from the community. But yeah, as I've said, without the support and when hierarchies of power don't support initiatives like this, it's going to fail. So yeah, it is really important to have people in power supporting these projects throughout.
So one more question about the volcano.
Okay.
We have, because of climate change, which has happened many times in the history of humanity, we have climate changes in the antiquity, which caused some cases of migration in Europe, and not only in Europe. We have immigrants from climate change, or possibly not, massive natural disasters, possibly the tsunami disaster in 2004. These people, they have bad experiences from these causes. How has this affected their lives? Such an experience, or possibly the life and mental state of a child.
Oh yes, certainly. I'm not an expert in clinical psychology, but certainly experiencing natural disasters, and that's why one of the things that I would like to explore in future projects is the lived experiences of refugees and asylum seekers, to really understand how migrating from natural or human-made disasters could impact on their health and well-being. For me, I haven't necessarily experienced it myself, and it's not my clinical expertise to explore the individual impact of such experiences on people. But future research, for example, from an experiential perspective, the lived experiences particularly would be um, excuse me, would be interesting to look at, particularly in this context, because context, varies depending on whether you are in a developed country or not a developing a different country. We have to take context into consideration, and experiences vary depending from one context to another. So I would say future research, particularly participatory research, to explore these experiences, particularly for children, I think would be really interesting.
Moreover, could we say a few things about the PAME code?
Oh yes, of course. Well, the PAMI code is my practice right now. I'm not associate. My husband told me that there is like a PAMI group. I'm not associated with the PAMI group. The PAMI code is a principle that I adopt in my teaching, in my coaching, and in my own practice, wherein we go together. PAMI, let's go together. And it is based on four components: purpose, action, momentum, and energy. So it's about identifying our purpose, being grounded in our purpose, and being true to our purpose. But our purpose is something that we have to pursue with action. Without action, our purpose is meaningless. It's nothing. So with purpose, you have to couple that with action, maintain your momentum, have consistency in your action, and maintain your energy. You have a positive energy, positive vibe. Let the positivity ripple out, and don't burn yourself out in the process as well. So I'm borrowing pame, thanks to the Greeks. I hear that from my husband all the time. Pame, pame. It's like, okay, I like that. Let me borrow that and use that in my practice. So essentially, it means purpose, action, momentum, and energy. And it's certainly something that I'm using right now in my teaching, in my coaching, and yeah, and in my own life as well, always reminding myself of my purpose, backing that up with action, maintaining the momentum, and maintaining the energy as well.
Mhm. So, one last questions, because I can see we're running out of time. Your advice to a student who wants to be a psychologist?
Why do you want to be a psychologist? That's my first question. If I go back to Pame, you have to identify your purpose first and foremost. Why do you want to be a psychologist? Is it just because there's nothing else to do, and I just pluck it out of the open, and I choose to be a psychologist? Try to dig deeper and understand, what do you want to do with you being a psychologist. And for me, as a psychologist, I wanted to use my psychology background as an instrument to make an impact in this world. Psychology is about the study of the way we think, the way we feel, our behavior, and our interaction with each other. And there are so many branches of psychology, whether you pursue health psychology, child development, cognitive psychology, even. There are social psychology right now. Social psychology. There are so many applications of social psychology, particularly in how we relate with each other. There are so many ways that we can use our understanding of psychology, our research methods, our influence as people who actually think, who actually feel things and do things. And when we use our position as psychologists, and for you starting out, when you have this grounding, that you have this sense of purpose, use that sense of purpose to ground yourself in your studies as you learn more about psychology and how it can impact generally not just individual people but society at large. You will find deeper meaning and purpose as a psychologist, and not just something that you are doing because there's nothing else to do. So that's what I have to say about that.
In the Aristotelian philosophy, there is a theory of four causes. The fourth cause is the final cause. We call it τελικό αίτιο, or oueneka in ancient Greece. So in everything we do, there is a purpose. Nothing happens accidentally. We have αίτιο και αποτέλεσμα, the cause and the result. I think that you have given us plenty of information about your expertise, and I hope that we're going to have new students who would like to work on your field, and particularly on the ideas that you give. What we say in science, future research. Να πω κιόλας εδώ για τους μελλοντικούς συναδέλφους, θα ήθελα να το αναφέρω ότι στην έρευνα υπάρχει κάτι το οποίο το λέμε future research, δηλαδή μελλοντική έρευνα, τι έκαναν οι προηγούμενοι και τι περιμένουν από εμάς να κάνουμε στη συνέχεια. Κάθε έρευνα έχει περιορισμούς. Οι συνάδελφους εδώ μας έδειξε έναν πάρα πολύ ωραίο τρόπο, ερευνητικά πεδία, ακόμη καλύτερα, τα οποία στο μέλλον θα έχουν πολύ μεγάλο περιθώριο εξέλιξης και νομίζω ότι θα ήταν πολύ ωραία ιδέα να έρθετε κοντά μας, να το συζητήσουμε και να δούμε και εμείς πώς μπορούμε να συμβάλλουμε στην καριέρα σας σε αυτό το σημείο. So, Emme, one last, if you want to say something before we close for today.
Sure. Well, I hope that this inspired, especially the young people, or actually not even mature students who might be interested in working on community empowerment and health promotion projects. There's so much that we can do together, and if you are interested in this, please feel free to reach out and look into doing a PhD in New York College, and I think we can work something out together.
So thank you, Emme. Ευχαριστούμε και εσάς που μείνατε μαζί μας. Να επαναλάβω εδώ ότι το βίντεο θα παραμείνει ενεργό στο YouTube για συνέχεια, οπότε μπορείτε να ξαναμπείτε και να το παρακολουθήσετε, να δείτε και το υλικό το οποίο υπάρχει. Να πω μόνο εδώ ότι την επόμενη εβδομάδα, την 5η 15 Απριλίου, συνεχίζουμε με την σειρά σεμιναρίων Science Cafe, όπου το θέμα μας θα είναι διατροφή και βιωσιμότητα, όπου ο εισηγητής μας είναι ο κύριος Κωνσταντίνος Χαρδαβέλας, διαιτολόγος, διατροφολόγος και αντιδήμαρχος Ευρωπαϊκών Προγραμμάτων και Ψηφιακής Διακυβέρνησης του Δήμου Παλαιού Φάλιρου. Θα είναι ένα πάρα πολύ ενδιαφέρον σεμινάριο, το οποίο σας καλούμε να το παρακολουθήσετε. Οπότε το σημερινό μας σεμινάριο έφτασε στο τέλος του. Ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ που μείνατε μαζί μας και αυτό το 2ωρο. Θα ήθελα εδώ να ευχαριστήσω και τους πολύ καλούς συναδέλφους οι οποίοι συνέβαλαν στην επιτυχία και του σημερινού webinar, τον Δημήτρη τον Παπαδόπουλο και την Φιλίτσα την Αρβανίτη, οι οποίοι κάθε φορά έχουν μια μεγάλη συνεισφορά στην διεξαγωγή των webinars και των συνεδρίων μας. Και ανανεώνουμε, όπως είπαμε, το ραντεβού μας για την επόμενη 5η 15 του μηνός. Άμα μπείτε στην ιστοσελίδα nyc.gr, στις εκδηλώσεις υπάρχει πλήρες αρχείο με το τι έπεται στη συνέχεια και να ξέρετε ότι όλος ο Απρίλιος αλλά και ο Μάιος θα είναι ένας πάρα πολύ όμορφος μήνας από πλευράς εκδηλώσεων. Έχουμε πάρα πολύ όμορφα πράγματα να κάνουμε στη συνέχεια και σας καλούμε να είστε κοντά μας και να τα παρακολουθήσετε. Καλό βράδυ, να είστε όλοι καλά και να προσέχετε. Γεια σας.